Alright, let's talk about D.H. Lawrence, one of the most fearless and emotionally intense voices in modern English literature. Born David Herbert Lawrence on September 11, 1885 in Eastwood, England, he grew up in a working-class family, his father a coal miner, his mother a former school teacher. That tension between earthy instinct and refined intellect became the emotional backbone of all his writing. Now, though Lawrence is best remembered as a novelist, it's important to note, and this has been asked in exam, that he was first published as a poet. Early on, he came under the influence of Ezra Pound and the Imagists, who emphasized sharp visual language. But Lawrence soon broke away, rejecting Pound's circle to follow his own powerful, intuitive path. His poems, unlike the cool precision of the Imagists, vibrate with life raw, personal, and spontaneous. Much of Lawrence's poetry celebrates nature, plants, animals, even the sensual vitality of the human body. But beneath that celebration, there's always a moral energy. He despised Puritanism and societal hypocrisy, believing that modern life had become mechanical and disconnected from the life force of nature. For him, sex, instinct, and the subconscious weren't sinful. They were healing forces. Now, as a writer, Lawrence was endlessly prolific but also controversial. He battled censorship throughout his life, especially for his final and most infamous novel, Lady Chatterley's Lover, published in 1928, which was banned for decades. Yes, the censorship around this novel has been asked in exam. He died of tuberculosis in France in 1930 at only 44, but by then he'd lived and written with more intensity than most manage in a lifetime. He even formed a circle of admirers in Taos, New Mexico, where he dreamed of founding a utopian community, another exam fact worth noting. Let's walk through his major works. His first novel, The White Peacock, 1911, was followed by The Trespasser, 1912. Then came his breakthrough masterpiece, Sons and Lovers. 1913, a deeply autobiographical work about a young man torn between maternal love and romantic desire. Next came The Rainbow, 1915, and Women in Love, 1920, both exploring love, freedom, and modern alienation. Then we have The Lost Girl, Aaron's Rod, Kangaroo, The Plumed Serpent, and of course, Lady Chatterley's Lover. His final novella, The Escaped Cock, later retitled The Man Who Died, reimagines the resurrection of Christ as a symbol of sensual rebirth. All of these titles, by the way, have appeared in exam questions, so it's worth memorizing the sequence. He was just as strong a short story writer. Key collections include The Prussian Officer, England, My England, The Fox, The Captain's Doll, The Rocking Horse Winner, and The Virgin and the Gypsy. If you see The Rocking Horse Winner in the exam, remember, it's a haunting modern fable about greed, luck, and love. As a poet, Lawrence published Love Poems and Others, 1913, Amores, 1916, and Look We Have Come Through, 1917. Then came Tortoises, 1921, and Birds, Beasts, and Flowers, 1923, one of his most celebrated collections. His last works, Pansies, 1929, and Nettles, 1930, were bold enough to be banned in England. Among his famous poems, Snake is perhaps the best known, a powerful meditation on fear and reverence for nature. The poem ends with the haunting lines, "And so I missed my chance with one of the lords of life, and I have something to expiate a pettiness." That exact quote has been asked in exam. Other major poems include Piano, Self-Pity, The Ship of Death, Bavarian Gentians, and The Song of the Man Who Has Come Through. He also wrote plays such as The Daughter-in-Law and The Widowing of Mrs. Holroyd, both rooted in working-class life. And finally, his non-fiction is equally fascinating. His Movements in European History, 1921, gives his unorthodox take on history. His essay, Why the Novel Matters, explores why fiction, more than philosophy or religion, reveals the living human soul. That title, too, has been asked in exam. And his studies in classic American literature, 1923, remains a groundbreaking collection of essays on writers like Whitman, Melville, and Poe, again an important exam point. So, in short, D.H. Lawrence wrote across every form: novels, short stories, poetry, drama, and essays. He explored sex, spirit, nature, and truth, not to shock but to awaken. Or, as Lawrence himself might put it, he wanted to help modern humanity come through, to reconnect with the primal life within. Let's talk about one of the most powerful psychological novels of the early 20th century, Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. Published in 1913 by Duckworth in London and Kennelly in New York, that's a detail often asked. In exam, this novel didn't receive much praise at first. In fact, it was even accused of obscenity for its open treatment of love and sexuality. But today, it's celebrated as a masterpiece and Lawrence's finest work. The story is semi-autobiographical, drawing deeply from Lawrence's own life and his intense attachment to his mother. When his mother died in 1910, it devastated him, and that grief became the emotional core of Sons and Lovers. The novel is set in a Nottinghamshire coal mining village, which mirrors Lawrence's own hometown, and yes, that location question has been asked in exam. It follows the life of Paul Morel, a sensitive young man growing up in a working-class family, caught between the pull of love and the shadow of obligation. His mother, Gertrude Morel, is a strong and intelligent woman trapped in a disappointing marriage. She hated her husband for his commonness, a line that's often quoted and has been asked in exam, and she pours all her frustrated love and ambition into her son Paul. Her affection becomes possessive, shaping his emotions and his relationships. Paul's father, Walter Morel, is a miner, coarse, hard-working but emotionally distant. The tension between his parents scars Paul's childhood. As he grows older, he becomes deeply attached to his mother, almost replacing his father as her emotional companion. This unnatural closeness becomes the novel's central psychological conflict, something every exam paper loves to test. When Paul falls in love with Miriam Levers, a quiet, spiritual girl, he finds himself torn. Miriam loves him with purity and devotion, but his mother disapproves, seeing Miriam as too possessive and too spiritual. Paul tries to love Miriam, but he cannot give himself fully. His mother's influence stands between them. Later, Paul meets Clara Dawes, a married but separated woman. Clara represents passion and physical desire, everything Miriam is not. Their affair is intense but also temporary. When his mother falls ill and finally dies, another exam point, Paul's world collapses. Her death leaves him lost, empty, and desperate. In the end, Paul faces life alone. He briefly considers giving up, even wishing for death, but then he chooses to live. The novel closes with him walking toward the city lights, a symbol of life, renewal, and independence. Lawrence writes, but no, he would not give in. He would go on to the end. That closing line has been asked in exam and is one of the most powerful endings in modern fiction. Sons and Lovers is more than just a story of family and love. It's a psychological study of human relationships, class tensions, and emotional dependence. Lawrence uses Paul's struggle to explore how a mother's love can nurture and yet suffocate, how passion can awaken and yet destroy. The novel also foreshadows Lawrence's later works like The Rainbow and Women in Love, both of which were inspired by his relationship with Frida Richthofen, the woman who became his wife, another exam point to keep in mind. Even modern critics have praised Sons and Lovers. The poet Philip Larkin once said, "I have been reading Sons and Lovers and feel ready to die." If Lawrence had been killed after writing that book, he'd still be England's greatest novelist. That quote too has been asked in exam. And just for fun, the film adaptation of Sons and Lovers was directed by Jack Cardiff, which is another factual detail that shows up often. So, If you remember only one thing, remember this. Sons and Lovers is a story about a young man torn between love and loyalty, between two women and one mother, and in that struggle, Lawrence captures the deepest conflicts of the human heart. Two of his most famous novels, The Rainbow and Women in Love, explore the same family across generations, and both have been asked repeatedly in exam. We start with The Rainbow, published in 1915. Now, what's interesting is that the book was officially banned for obscenity. Soon after publication, the police actually confiscated unsold copies, which of course only made it more famous. The story follows three generations of the Brangwyn family, living in the English Midlands between 1840 and 1905. That timeline has been asked in exam. The novel opens with Tom Brangwyn, a farmer who marries Lydia Lenski, a Polish widow. Their relationship slowly deteriorates, and we move to the next generation, Anna Lydia's daughter, who marries Will Brangwyn, Tom's nephew. Their marriage too is passionate but stormy, full of conflict and longing, another fact worth remembering for exam. But the heart of the novel belongs to Ursula, Anna and Will's daughter. Ursula becomes a school teacher and a symbol of the modern woman, independent, questioning, unwilling to submit to traditional roles. She falls in love with Anton Skrybensky, but ultimately rejects both him and the institution of marriage, choosing instead a path of freedom and self-discovery. The title, The Rainbow, represents hope and renewal, especially Ursula's vision at the end, a vision of a world beyond social and moral restrictions. The rainbow becomes a symbol of her spiritual future. And if you remember one line, it's this one. She wanted so much more, always more. That's Ursula's cry for a fuller life. The story continues directly into Lawrence's next novel, Women in Love, 1920, which is actually the sequel to The Rainbow. That link has been asked in exam many times. Here, we again meet Ursula Brangwyn, now joined by her sister Gudrun, who is an artist. The two sisters fall in love, Ursula with Rupert Birkin, kind of stand-in for Lawrence himself, and Gudrun with Gerald Critch, an industrial magnate. These two love stories mirror each other. Ursula and Rupert's relationship aims for a spiritual and emotional union, while Gudrun and Gerald's is passionate, violent, and destructive. Their connection burns intensely, but ends in tragedy. Gerald's obsession with control, both emotional and industrial, ultimately leads to his death in the Tyrolean Alps, giving the novel a dark, symbolic ending. The novel also delves deeply into pre-war Britain, the industrial Midlands, where mechanical progress seems to crush human connection. Lawrence contrasts that modern alienation with his desire for raw, vital relationships. There's even an undercurrent of attraction between Gerald and Rupert, showing Lawrence's fascination with psychological and sexual complexity, another key exam detail. One of the novel's most quoted lines, also asked in exam, comes from Rupert, "What is love if it's not free?" It captures Lawrence's lifelong theme, love as a struggle for freedom, not possession. Both novels together explore love, individuality, and spiritual awakening, set against the forces of industrialism and social convention. In The Rainbow, the focus is on family and generations. In Women in Love, it shifts to philosophy, sexuality, and modern identity. So, if you're revising for exam, here's what to lock in. The Rainbow, banned for obscenity, 3 generations of the Brangwyn family, and Ursula's journey toward independence. Women in Love, the sequel, focused on Ursula and Gudrun's relationships with Rupert and Gerald, exploring love, freedom, and death. Both novels are connected through Ursula's story, a woman searching for meaning beyond tradition. Together, they form one of Lawrence's most powerful explorations of human passion, the struggle to live, love, and be free in a world that constantly tries to bind you. Alright, let's talk about one of the most controversial and most groundbreaking novels of the 20th century, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. The novel was first published in 1928, and that's been asked in exam. Interestingly, The first English edition wasn't published in England at all. It came out in Florence and Paris because no British publisher dared print it. An expurgated or censored version appeared later in 1932, but the full uncut text didn't officially appear in New York until 1959 and finally in London in 1960. That 1960 publication in England led to the famous obscenity trial, Regina versus Penguin Books Limited, another key exam point. Penguin, the publisher, was taken to court for publishing the complete version, but they won the case. The trial became a landmark moment for freedom of expression in literature, justifying the use of taboo language when it served artistic purpose. Now, what's the novel about? It tells the story of Constance Reed, better known as Lady Chatterley. That name has been asked in exam, who is married to Sir Clifford Chatterley, an upper-class intellectual paralyzed from a war injury. Clifford represents the cold, cerebral, and industrial side of modern England. His paralysis is often read as a symbol of industrial civilization's spiritual and physical sterility. Another point that's been asked in exam. Constance feels trapped in a passionless marriage. There's no physical intimacy, only intellectual companionship. Into this sterile world steps Oliver Mellers, the gamekeeper on their estate, and yes, the gamekeeper affair is one of the most famous motifs in modern literature. Despite their class difference, Lady Chatterley and Mellers begin a passionate affair that reconnects her with nature, emotion, and physical life. For Lawrence, this wasn't just a love story, it was a philosophy. He believed that industrial society had cut people off from the body and from genuine feeling. In his view, true love must be both physical and spiritual, something natural, instinctive, and deeply human. The affair then becomes a kind of rebellion against class, intellect, and repression. The novel opens with that haunting line, "Ours is essentially a tragic age." It sets the tone perfectly, a world destroyed by war and mechanization where human connection feels impossible. But through Constance and Mellers, Lawrence imagines a way back, a kind of healing through passion and nature. Let's quickly recall the three main characters since they're often asked in exam. Lady Constance Chatterley, the emotionally and physically unfulfilled wife. Sir Clifford, her paralyzed husband, symbolizing intellect, industry, and impotence. Oliver Mellers, the gamekeeper, working class, vital, and connected to nature. By the end, Constance and Mellers dream of a future together, even as society condemns them. Their love defies class boundaries and moral conventions, suggesting that real intimacy lies beyond social systems. The novel's legacy is huge. Its frank descriptions of sexuality led to decades of censorship and scandal, but also forced society to rethink what could be written and read. After the trial, it became a symbol of literary freedom and authenticity. So when you think of Lady Chatterley's lover, think beyond the scandal. Think of it as Lawrence's boldest statement against the coldness of modern life and his celebration of human warmth, passion, and connection with the natural world.